observations wherever you may be. I'm here with Scott and Kirk. How are you, fellas?
Good, thank you.
Well, I'm not in my best of form, just because this time of year can be the best of times and the worst of times. And the conversation we were having as we were moving into the show talks about the worst of times. We're celebrating Pesach Matzah B'Kurim, so this show is brought to you by Matzah. But the worst of times is that this year the 7 days of celebrating Pesach Matzah B'Kurim overlaps the pagan celebration of Easter. And that's very troubling from my perspective. I would just say this, Kirk, Scott.
Yes.
If you are ignorant enough and sufficiently irrational to think that a person named Jesus lived in the first century, when there was no one by that name and no letter even that would convey that thought, and that most certainly isn't a Hebrew name.
No.
You mean a bunch of kids in Israel aren't named Jesus?
No.
Oh.
No.
They're not even named that today.
No. The first J was invented in the 17th century, and the us ending isn't part of Hebrew grammar. It changes the name, the Hebrew name, to make it acceptable to the Greek ear. He wasn't Greek. Didn't have a Greek name. And the J didn't even exist in the Greek language, much less the Hebrew language at the time. So if you're stupid enough, let's just use the sensible terms. If you're stupid enough to think that a person named Jesus lived in the first century, and that he came to create a new religion, and that religion is based on the Greek word for drugged, Christos, and therefore Christian, and that this God was so feeble that man was able to kill him. For a while, God didn't exist. Man killed him. If you're that stupid that you believe that's the case, and that this God, though, managed to do something that would be totally and completely counterproductive, which is to be bodily resurrected, because our physical bodies are liabilities. They're not of merit, particularly when we're dealing with being with Yahowah, who is a spiritual being. And that this occurred coinciding with and named after an event that is purely Babylonian, purely and 100% pagan, called Easter, named after Astarte and Ishtar, the Mother of God and the Queen of Heaven, whom Yahowah says are a plague on humankind. If you're stupid enough to celebrate that on a Sunday morning, then, I don't give a damn about you. God doesn't give a damn about you. You are so stupid, you deserve the consequence of your idiocy. Your bunny who lays eggs in compliance with the Babylonian fertility cult. Your Easter ham in compliance with the wild boar that attacked and killed Nimrod, the fake version of Yosha who would become the model for Tammuz and for Osiris and for Dionysus, of whom the Christian Jesus is modeled. You deserve your fate. That's my thoughts. Yours?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny, because of the thing you sent me the other day, and I started doing some, looking up some different words and things, and what I did, I took all the words for sin that they laid on Yosha.
Mm-hmm.
And I went from Shemas, Shemen, Shalal, Awan, Mirma, on and on and on and on, all the way down to Pisha and Shagal.
Mm-hmm.
And it was funny that all the sins, supposedly, because the Christians would just say, put all our sins on him. All of the things, some of the ones that really jumped out were things like Shemin, which is a sun worship or the idol worship of something representing the sun god. Mm-hmm. You have religious plague in Chala, Awan, everything that was in there on this list. And I did a huge study as far as I wrote everything I could find anywhere. And all the thing was, so little of it was in the things that Christians always say, well, he's saving me from, because I was bad to my sister, or I did this, or things they toss them. Yeah. Everything was the things that we're doing at Easter.
Correct. Yeah, as a matter of fact, there really isn't a Hebrew word for sin.
No.
There really isn't. Yahowah has about 20 different words, about 5 or 6 he uses with great regularity, to describe Babel. And the terms that are used to describe Babel are almost always perversion, corruption, counterfeit, whitewashing, being wrong, inappropriate, diseased, malignant. Yeah. There are terms that you would apply to a pandemic like religion, to statements made by politicians, to the actions and purposes of a military. They are not personal terms, but Pesha, for example, is a universal revolt. And one of the most interesting terms of all happens to be in the passage that I hope we spend considerable time on in this evening show, which is 2 Samuel 7:14. And let me just read it, because I think it's so telling in this regard. It says, I will actually and always be for him as a father, and he shall always and actually exist for me as a son, which through this association, and to show the way, with him becoming burdened with perversity, I will resolve the dispute by judging him, accusing him, so as to manifest vindication through him with regard to the rods, weapons, and staffs wielded by rulers of nations to punish, kill, and control the races and tribes of mankind, and because of the assault and plague that has befallen upon the children of Adam.
Well,
that is what Pesach and Matzah leading to Bakodim is all about. Mm-hmm. That's the purpose of it. And yet Christians are so absolutely wrong, so perverted, so corrupt, that they've had a Jesus die as opposed to deal with this. And then they ignore how he dealt with it on Matzah, completely ignoring what happened on that Shabbat. For him only to come back as corrupt flesh, corrupting flesh. It's astounding that they could carry a book that has 2 Samuel in it. But, of course, their translations of 2 Samuel 7:14 says, if he sins or when he sins, I will not spare the rod of men. Well, if he sinned, dear Christian, you got nothing. Because then you killed him for his own perversity. If he sinned, dear Christian, he was not the perfect Passover lamb, which means he couldn't have represented God. Mm-hmm. So you're really screwed if your translation is accurate. But yet you lug it around and you don't even think about it.
No. They don't seem, and I used to be one, so I'm talking from knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too.
They don't seem to know what God hates.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you go through all these words that are translated from sin or related to it, Yahweh is very consistent about
what he hates.
The same things he talks about on the first tablet of the stone.
Right. These are the things I hate. I am not going to tolerate. You're not going to exist with another God in my presence.
Yeah.
And the second statement is, you've got to disassociate yourself from all things that are religious. Everything that's religious, and you really ought to recognize that, fathers, you're corrupting your own sons to the third and fourth generation.
And then back to the point about Jesus, it says, don't change my name, don't diminish my name. He certainly diminish someone's name when you don't even use it, and you use something
Right.
that comes from...
Oh, yeah, can you imagine? There's very few more egregious corruptions of the perversions of the third statement in stone, which does not say, do not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. It doesn't say anything even remotely akin to that. It says, do not diminish the value of my name, Yahowah, because I will not forgive anyone who diminishes and negates my name. By changing Yahusha, which means Yahweh saves, to Jesus, you've done just that. In fact, what you've done is destroyed the entire merit of 2 Samuel 7:14.
Mm-hmm.
This connection between Father and Son. And we're going to talk this evening about why that connection between Father and Son is so essential in this prophecy about how God would go about resolving the perversity of humankind.
Well, let me ask you about one quick little thought.
Uh-huh.
The difference, when we talk about Saul being Shaul,
Yes.
Saul, being evil or wrong, not good, off the path, not functioning well. And then we talk about Dode functioning well, and we know he's filled with all kind of terrible behavior in his life. However, when I consider that, which we're discussing right now, when you consider that, if I looked on the 2 tablets of stone, we have the ones that he will not forgive and the other things which are just really bad behavior you shouldn't do. And you certainly shouldn't do them.
And don't make a practice of it. Yes. Sometime before it's too late, stop.
Yeah. Even the ones on the first, he could forgive if you walk away from them. That's why Abraham walked away.
I'll be a little bit careful here.
Okay.
I don't think there is any forgiveness in the first one. If he just says quite simply, if you will not exist with other gods in my presence. So while we can resolve that by shedding all of our references to, at least homage to, false gods like Jesus and Lord and Allah and all that sort of rot. Well, we can resolve that by letting go of it as an ongoing statement. If you're clinging to false gods, if you're a Christian praying to your Jesus, you cannot enter heaven.
All right.
It's not resolvable.
No, not as long as you're clinging to it. No, absolutely.
Right. And the number 2, which is that if you are religious, then not only you're corrupting your children, but Yahweh's mercy is not available to you. That's what the second statement says. And it gives you no quarter. It's not one of those things where you can say, boy, yeah, okay, I'm letting go a little bit of it, little by little, I'm making some progress. No, before you can even deal with the Yahweh, you've got to walk away from religion. Completely and totally disassociate yourself with it. And the third one is, it just drives it right home. I am never going to forgive someone who negates the value of my name. And that would mean every Roman Catholic. Every Roman Catholic. Every Orthodox Christian. Every Protestant Christian. 100% of the 3 largest veins of Christianity ignore, negate, or absolutely disallow Yahweh's name. And every Christian Bible that you read replaces Yahweh's name either with Jehovah, which is god-awful, or with the Lord, which could be worse.
Oh, yeah. Well, back to my point, think about, just for a minute, maybe this is, I just thought it was rather interesting when it came to me this morning. I was thinking about this. Dode, for all his failures on the right-hand side of the column, well, I guess that's the left hand, but on the second tablet of stone, the first tablet of stone, he would not touch those things. There's no record anywhere of him. If anybody hollered out Yahweh's name, it was Dode. If anyone avoided or hated sun worship and all that kind of stuff.
Think about this for a moment. Just struck me. It may not be a big deal, but since you brought it up, I'm at least going to interrupt you long enough because it just dawned on me.
Okay.
Hebrew reads right to left, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So where would the first tablet be held if Hebrew is going to read from right to left?
That's going to be on the right-hand side.
Yeah, it's going to be on the right-hand side, isn't it? Yeah. And so the first tablet is on the right-hand side, and those are the three tablets that speak of our relationship between humankind and Yahowah, and what He is really telling us that, you know, when I'm telling you I'm your liberator, and when I'm telling you that my mercy is available to the thousands who observe the terms and conditions of my covenant, He is pretty much on, if you do any of these things on an ongoing basis, if you continue to do these things, you and I are never going to have a relationship.
No.
And there's one of them, which is negating the value of my name, which is worse than we're just not going to have a relationship. You're in serious trouble.
Yeah, I can't stand you.
Right. The others are can be interpreted as relationship between men and women. But I don't think that is the primary meaning of them. I think they too speak of our relationship between man, man and Yahowah. And of course, what's also interesting, speaking of the stupidity of Christianity and the stupidity of Easter Sunday, the first statement on the second tablet is more than half of the tablet. And what is the first statement on the second tablet? And by the way, they're listed in priority in terms of importance. What's the first one?
It's the one about no other God.
No, the second tablet.
No. Okay,
the Shabbat.
Shabbat, yeah.
Shabbat.
Oh, I'm talking, you mean on the second statement.
Yeah, on the second tablet. Yeah, on the second tablet. The first statement of the second tablet that takes up more than half of the second tablet. And the entirety of the first, which is the most important of the 7 statements on the second tablet, and comprises more than half of the tablet. And it's the only one, by the way, that's explained. All the others just said, don't make a practice of killing, don't make a practice of stealing, don't make a practice of bearing false witness, of lying, don't make a practice of committing adultery, don't fail to in any way value your father and mother, and the value of the father and mother, of course, is our heavenly Father and spiritual mother. They all are very quick. No explanation. You've got to think them through to understand them. On the Shabbat, the Sabbath, the 7th day, man, I'm going to give you every nuance that you need to know about this, and I'm going to explain it to you. And what do Christians do? Oh, well, he's just kidding. I don't know why he wrote it in stone. He should have had an eraser.
He should have had an eraser so we can go to Sunday school.
Yeah, well, we want to go to Sunday school. We want to have a Sunday worship service. We want to have a Sunday sunrise service. Now, if you're that stupid, you deserve your fate. And the fate of every Christian that is a victim of Paul's plague of death is to die, their soul ceasing to exist. The fate of those who promote Christianity, the pastors, the publishers, the priests, the popes, is to be eternally separated from Yah. They're going to spend their eternity in hell, which will be an extremely religious place. That is your fate if you're not smart enough to realize that you've been played for a fool. It's interesting, Kirk, we received a couple of letters today, one or this week, one which is a harsher version of all of our stories. And that is from Danny. Danny was Danny was involved in the British Army, many tours in Babylon in Iraq, and then tried desperately when he came to realize that everything he'd been told in the military was an absolute lie. There was nothing but a sea of lies. That somehow there had to be some truth out there, and that somehow he had to bust through the insanity of it all, and found an old King James Bible, read it twice from cover to cover. First time said, "Oh my God, this is impossible to understand," and the second time came to say, the problem that I have with this is the end of it. It's Paul. He's obviously a fraud. And then he went to Christians to say, can you explain this to me? And none of them had even read the book. And he's just, one day he's driving down the street and he's just mad as hell. And I said, God, what in the hell is wrong here? This is ridiculous. And he goes back home, and he ends up confronting some Christians who were promoting Paul, and it ends up that Larry and 3 others on his site find him and start sharing what Yahowah actually said. His first comment is, "What is this shit?" Which is, I mean, that's the real world of it's so different than everything you've ever heard. And then all of a sudden he just says, "Oh my,
yeah,
this is true. This makes sense. This is the real deal." And here's this rough and tumble guy who's had he's been as bad as Dode. And here's you and I like to use the story of Dode because he did so many things wrong. It makes us feel good by comparison. I'm not sure Danny can use Dode that way. He's been down 1,000 miles of rough road.
Yeah.
But here he is just saying, "Oh, it doesn't matter anymore. I've just given it all up. That doesn't matter anymore." Yeah. But at the same time, we got a letter, from a fellow named Joshua.
Yes.
Who got all in a twit over his wife wanted to serve his son or daughter some bread over matzah, and he said, "Well, if that's going to condemn him to or her to die, then I'm going to eat bread. The hell with it." And you're going, no. What is it about the imperfect that you don't understand? So long as your son or daughter stops, it's sometimes because you've properly informed them. Eating the leavened yeasted fungus during Pesach and understands what in matzah and what that represents, and takes advantage of it at any time during their lives, then the fact that Mom gave them a loaf of leavened bread during matzah isn't going to make any difference.
No.
Not one of us. I'm going to tell you, I think I can speak for all 3 of us here.
Mm-hmm.
We all ate leavened bread during Passover, Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim in our past.
Yes, we did.
Yes, we did. And by the way, so did the Israelites.
Yes.
All of them. All of them. And so it's God's not. This issue isn't what have you done. It's what are you going to do?
Yeah. It's the path. What path do you want to get on?
Right. What path do you want to get on? So you want to continue to mislead your son or daughter? Or do you want to set a good example for them?
Well, that's what's so sad about the Shaul story.
Yeah.
He never relinquishes the first tablet.
No.
He goes and calls up Samuel and on, and just everything that God hates the most, he winds up doing.
Yeah. And look what it cost him, and look what it cost Israel.
Yeah.
It's not like Yahweh didn't warn them, though.
No.
And of course, what does King Saul, serve as a metaphor for?
Well, Shaul, the plague of death.
Yeah, the founder of the Christian religion.
Yeah.
The entire story
Same name, same name.
of Shaul is told to warn Christians about Shaul, whom they call Paul, whom God says is the plague of death. That's what the purpose of that story is. And Yahweh is most concerned with the chosen people, and that would be Israel.
Mm-hmm.
When a religion destroys 10 billion souls, that makes it up to his level of interest, and that's Christianity.
Yes.
Well, okay. Now, I know that today we wanted to return to the research that, and we'll talk more about Easter and this passage in prophecy in 2 Samuel 7:14 this evening. But you wanted to continue, and I maybe should backtrack a bit with some of the material that you covered with Scott, since it was several weeks ago. In terms of the 8th plague the 11th plague, the dark times that befell Egypt after the 10 plagues and after the Exodus. What we know from non-Torah sources as to what happened, what corroboration we have of these facts. We went through all the corroboration of the facts as they are associated with the 10 plagues. We've dealt several shows on those. But what happened thereafter that we can use to verify that what Yahowah said would befall the Mitzrayim, the Egyptians, the crucibles, did actually befall them?
Oh yeah, and it's called the 11th plague, of course. Yahowah doesn't mention it, but they are. We find out later that they certainly were aware of these people or the thing that was.
Well, he doesn't call it the 11th plague, but he does specifically say that I'm plaguing them.
Yeah. And but as far as the nature of what it was, it's not real clear till you read enough, and then all of a sudden you realize is exactly what happens. But we went through from that point on. We went from Apura to al-Arish monument, which is a stone that they found in the city al-Arish, hence the name. And that covered. It talked about Pharaoh and how he was killed by a whirlwind. And which matches the story of Exodus.
Yeah.
And like in Exodus 14:9, I think I told the audience last time that the Egyptians pursued them and they overtook them in a place called.
It says the land was in great affliction, is what that stone reads. There was such a whirlwind that neither man nor of course the Egyptian gods could see the face of their next. And Shemot names Exodus 10:22 and 23. There was such a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. They saw not one another.
Right. So I said we're crossing the. So obviously, when they did leave, moved down a little bit down to Exodus 14:9, but they were trying to find the location where Pharaoh found them. And where it actually was, and that was when we found on the stone, that's the al-Arish stone, that His Majesty says His Majesty Pharaoh finds them on a place called Karote. But what's so interesting about that is Exodus 14:9, the Egyptians pursued them and overtook them and camped by the sea beside Ha-Karoth. Now, the only difference in the two words is that the ha is just the word for the definite article. Yeah. And it just means the mouth of the gorge, which was descriptive of the place.
So the stone and Yahowah's testimony in Shemot Exodus 14:9 are identical. It is also important, I want to make sure people have appreciation of this. I've mentioned this a bunch of times. And even though I've mentioned a bunch of times, I'm going to ask you a question, and there's no problem if you don't remember the name.
Sure. Okay.
What do the people who live in the Black Land, who are dominated today by General Sisi, what do they call their country?
Mizraim.
They call their country Mitzrah. Yeah, Mitzrah. Mitzrah. Yeah, in the singular. Mitzrah.
Yeah, singular.
Right. To this day, they call themselves by the name Mitzrah. What this term did Yahowah have Moshe describe to say this is their name 3,500 years ago?
Mitzrah. Mizraim.
Right. Mitzrayim is just the plural of Mitzrah.
Yeah, the plural, yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those things. It's just like, 3,000 years before man stumbled upon the Rosetta Stone and came up with a phonetic pronunciation of the sun god of Egypt and the pharaohs named after that sun god, Ra, and Amen-Ra. Yahowah provided us with a phonetic alphabet to pronounce that name. I never said they were in the city of Ramses, which was the city thought to be the son of the sun god Ra.
Right.
It's just for him to I don't know if you're going to have people have an appreciation of what are the likelihoods by chance of Moshe having an alphabet and writing down things that are 3,500 years old that would find absolute affirmation 3,500 years later. Mitzrah, as in Mitzrayim, the name for the Black Land, Egypt, which is actually from the Greek, Egypt is, and Ra, and the proper pronunciation of their God. Even the name, even Pharaoh, even the Hebrew concept of Pharaoh. All thousands of years before any other source would reveal this information, at least any source that humankind could read.
Well, besides the just obvious, the internal evidences in the history that we're reviewing is so overwhelming.
Right. The detail, the name of the place.
Even though they're boring to listen to, and I realize I'm boring to read them.
No, you're not.
Read them, but
it's fascinating.
Set it up to say, oh wow,
right
there.
Right. Exactly the same name of the place confirmed in the Torah that we now find on an engraved stone in Egypt.
Yeah. Because, and then I'll just read it, the inscription on the shrine at al-Rassooli says the name of Pharaoh who perished in the whirlpool. Now, why the heck would they talk about the whirlpool if it didn't happen?
And perishing in the whirlpool. You know how many whirlpools there are in Egypt? None.
And how many pharaohs get killed in them?
None. None.
Be a record somewhere?
Well, one, but it was in the chasing. Yeah, it was in the chasing of Yisrael out of Mitzrayim that this occurred.
And it says that they called him on this stone. They call him Tom or Thum, Thoum, Tatham is the abode of Tom, and in the name of one of the two cities built by the Israelite slaves for the Pharaoh of oppression. It was called Pithon. The other was Ramses. So I went on to say in Manetho.
And by the way, the fact that the city was called Ramses did not mean that it was under the pharaoh of Ramses the Great or Ramses the First, Second, or Third. It means that the city was named the son of the sun.
Right. It's just the God's name, and then of course later if a pharaoh wants to name himself after Ramses, so be it. That's fine. Right. That doesn't prove anything other than he named himself Dasa. Now, Manetho was a Greek historian way back, and the thing we can count on about that, the reason we have his records, because they're not extant, but Josephus, for all his faults, he said, I'm copying this exactly as I'm reading it in the Greek, and we have a substantial amount of stuff there, so we went on and talked about that last time as well. But he wrote that the Pharaoh in whose days the blast of heavenly displeasure that fell on Egypt preceding the invasion of the Hyksos, now that's interesting, is called Tutmosis or Theos, which is Greek form of Pithom or Tom. So
stunning, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Really.
So if you look at the evidence, it's all over the place, and you have to kind of step over it if you don't want this to come out.
Correct.
There's no motive for these people, and I had a whole sheet on what are the motives for these people, these historians, to write these things, or these people digging up this stuff. What's the motive for these people to write this, to make up a story that doesn't enhance their image?
Well, particularly since none of them would have had access to the Torah's account.
That's right.
So they're not trying to affirm the Torah or refute the Torah. They've got no access to the Torah's account. So the fact they're naming the same places and the same sequence of events is just that the realization that nothing this monumental could have occurred in Egypt and then affecting the surrounding tribes and civilizations without there being many records of it. And that's what we find, many records of it.
Now, we have two problems.
Okay.
One problem in that area, and that same thing that happened to all the Torahs and any witness writings that may have been available, is that the Romans, of course, destroyed them. But you also had this gigantic ancient library in Alexandria that got burned up.
By the Muslims.
What was there.
Yeah, by the Muslims.
Yes.
Yes.
And then, of course, the Catholics, when they invaded South America, or North America in the case of Mexico, the Mayan had a huge amount of library, had a beautiful library according to the people invaded. And, of course, they burned that up.
Yeah, I would tell people that when it comes to man's histories, you ought not be trusting. You know, I think that what you're finding here is just these extraordinary common references to these events. But for the most part, the Egyptian hieroglyphics are not to be trusted.
No.
Because what they were is priests and pharaohs trying to present themselves as divine.
Yeah.
And they all exaggerated the length of their lives and the extent of their rule. And then one of the things that I found interesting, because I wrote volume 7 about a year or so ago of Yahowah, was that the Roman histories, starting about the time of Julius Caesar, were nothing but propaganda pieces. Julius Caesar's own writing about himself were him trying to promote himself to a deified status, and that hundreds of years later with Constantine, that whole myth of Constantine converting to Christianity and seeing the cross emblazoned in front of the sun and hearing this, all made up. Long after the event, in the 3rd edition of the story of his really vicious conquest of his own people. And then when these Roman historians would write about Rome's just despicable relationship with Yahowah, what they had to say bore absolutely no association of any kind with the truth. You know, it's almost like, and the Roman Christians followed them, like the whole story of their persecution. It's just not true.
Yeah.
Every bit of it. And I think it's how Christians have managed to disassociate their religion from Israel, from Yahowah, from the Torah and the prophets, is that they're all wrapped up in this revisionist history that bears no resemblance to the truth. That's how they end up with the Jesus. That's how they end up with a religion called Christianity. That's how they end up with Easter. Yeah, with church and with Easter. All of it is based upon thousands of years of one lie being put on top of another, to the point that there aren't but 1 in a million people that can see past the sea of lies.
It's tragic.
It is tragic. So anyway, let's continue with your investigation.
Well, I went from there to a bunch of questions. Do you want to cover any of those on page?
Sure, go ahead.
Or do you want to go to?
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. I had some questions and some statements, and one of them was, does Yahowah send Malak, angels, messengers, to destroy life or protect human life? Mostly, I was referring to a section back there where we covered in the Torah thing when it's, in the Torah when he says that it's translated so poorly, and I covered that as well. So I won't talk a whole lot about it, but Yahowah didn't send angels to do this or distress Egypt.
Yeah,
and it could be translated that he just sent people.
Yeah, it's Malak. And Malak is the Hebrew word for messenger. And so message or messenger, envoy, ambassador. Listen, there are 2 ways that it can be interpreted. Either way, if not both, are valid.
Sure.
Yahowah created all of the Malak. They are implements. They're not robots, but they are programmed to carry out Yahowah's instructions. And they're the individuals that are miscalled angels, based again on a corruption of the Greek. But Malak means messenger, and the vast preponderance of the time that Yahowah is using messenger, he is speaking of the Saba, which is the command and control regimen of spiritual implements that Yahowah uses, and among those, about a third of them are aligned with the adversary.
Yeah.
So could Yahowah have sent Malak, adversarial Malak, to plague the Egyptians? Yes.
Yeah.
Could he have sent his good Malak? Could he have sent still functional Malak? Yeah, I mean, he could have done either, but could it also have been that he allowed evil envoys, corrupt individuals to plague Egypt?
Yeah.
Yes.
Protection. Here they come.
Right. Yeah, either one. Could he have even interfered? And occasionally Yahowah does interfere with and engage in free will, not only to protect his people, but to make certain that there is an ultimate consequence for doing things that are really in opposition to him. And what the Mitzrayim and the leaders of Mitzrayim did to his people was so destructive and so abysmal that Yahowah wanted to make certain that the world understood, this is the consequence of that. I'm not going to leave you alone for that. I'm going to make certain you pay a price for that. And Yahowah could well have sent the Amalekites there and said, okay, deal with them. Here's your 11th plague.
Mm-hmm.
These are savages.
Yes.
You were savages. Now see what it's like to be slaves to these savages. So yeah, I think my view, either one or both is a reasonable interpretation of what he meant when he used Malak in that case.
So you don't have to get hung up on that because I agree with you, either one or both. But obviously the Amu did show up. They were the most vicious people. In fact, when you look at what they were about, I mean. My gosh, it just goes on and on and on. These people are so crude, so murderous, so enslaving. Everything you can say about Islam, these people did first, and in greater quantity until now. I mean, they were just vicious people, and that's what the Dark Ages was about. They didn't build anything. They didn't write about anything other than recorded just stuff internally, as far as ruling empire.
Right.
They were horrible.
Correct. They were akin. They treated the Egyptians the way they treated the Israelites.
Yeah.
They were a plague, and it even speaks of them. Being a plague that came upon the land, trying to destroy the land. And when you look at what Muslims today, and the Amalekites foreshadow the Muslims today.
Yes.
When you look at what the Muslims are trying to do with Israel, there isn't a Muslim that's trying to say, this is a shared land, or this is a land that we want to blossom. This is a land that we want to invest our energies in to make it the most wonderful place on earth to live. No.
Yeah, it's so why are they doing it now?
Yeah, their goal is to kill Jews.
Yes.
And to destroy any vestige of Yahowah and Yisrael in the land. Hamas is a destructive, as is the PLO. They're destructive. They're deadly organizations. They're killing machines. Jihadist organizations are killing machines. They're destructive. They don't build anything. In fact, Islam has never built. It is always destroyed. The first 100 years of Islam, what's called their golden age, was all about raping the world, plundering the world, killing a higher percentage of the world's population than any plague that has ever been perpetrated by humankind.
Parallel.
Yeah, there's no parallel to how vicious they were from Morocco all the way to the Indus Valley in India. Nothing parallels it. It's the worst tragedy of all of humankind, and that's considered the golden age of Islam, the 100 years following Muhammad's death. So yeah, these people are one and the same, and we'll get into what God told his Israelites, his chosen people, to do with them. They didn't do it, did they?
No, and I wrote a statement here that, and I'll read this one out, is many old and weak and even slow staggerers we're talking about during the Exodus were attacked viciously and killed by the Amalekites as they followed the long column of Moshe was had to be at least 2+ million people. Now, remember, they also took out a bunch of Egyptians who were with them, too, that participated, I guess, in Passover or stayed in their homes. So they did leave some other people with them as well. So the numbers could be quite great, I guess. And
it's like wolves trailing behind a herd. And those who are weak and fall behind, they prey upon.
Absolutely. Right. And this became Yah's theme because he mentioned it several times about the destruction of the Amalekites. And he says, remember what the Amalekite did to Moshe's people as they followed along. And he drives that home on a couple occasions. Yah did, however, not ask the Israelites, and I thought this was important, he did not ask the Israelites to kill the Amalekites on any foreign soil, despite their evil nature and despite the treatment of his family.
That's correct.
Now, so if you think he went out and he's a destructive God, he said, you will clean up the land I promised Abraham.
Right. That's why, when throughout the story of the Torah, the prophets, and the Psalms, one of the things you find is that God is interested in his house being set apart, special, clean. He doesn't want any religion, doesn't want any politics, he doesn't want any militarism in his home. And so he had and asked the Israelites to clean what was his home, which would be their home. Not clean the world. It's not our responsibility. What our neighbor wishes to do, if you want to be stupid enough to celebrate Easter,
go ahead.
Just
be advised.
Be advised, but go ahead and be stupid. But in our home, no. And that's what Yah was saying with the Amalekite.
Yeah.
They're not going to exist in our home. And what I read where the leader, I think it's of Sweden, but where one of the it's been a bad week for Muslims being murderous. They killed 50 some odd people in Egypt when they blew up a bomb in the Copt church, and then they ran multiple trucks into innocent bystanders, and after the person that perpetrated, I think it was in Sweden, said, yeah, I did it on behalf of Islam and Allah Akbar. And he says, yes, okay, so this was a terrorist act, but that's not going to dissuade us Swedes from our tolerant and accepting view. Yahweh says, no, I don't want you to be tolerant. I don't want you to be accepting, because if you're tolerant and accepting, your children are going to die.
Don't you care about your children?
Yeah, don't you care about your children? Aren't you going to protect them? Yeah, we're going to be so tolerant. We're going to let diseased rats and venomous and murderous beasts live in our home. And Yahweh said, no, you're not. Not without a hell of a consequence. You go that way, and you'll pay for it for a very long time. Consequence. So Yahweh is the opposite of multicultural, tolerant, and accepting. He's none of those things.
Yeah. There's a parallel between, I asked the question, I made the statement, Yah didn't destroy Egypt, because obviously the plagues did, the earthquakes did, the tornadoes, hurricanes, meteorites, volcanoes, etc. And later the Amalekites destroyed Egypt. God just didn't save them. It's the same scenario with the flood with Noah. God didn't seek to kill everybody in that area. He would have saved them if they had turned to him.
Yeah, protected them. He would have protected them from them, right. But if you're going to enslave his children and not let them go, because Yah was a liberator.
Yeah.
If you're going to not allow his children to be liberated, then this is what's going to. Yeah. Personally, I think the Amalekite is the perfect plague.
Yeah.
Because the Egyptians, the Mitzrayim, the Crucible, they were vicious. They enslaved. They forced others to do their bidding. They demeaned. They were extraordinarily hostile to the children of Israel. So what better plague for them to understand the consequence of that?
Ratchet up a little more and then send it to them.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Then why don't you live for a few hundred years under the rule of people who are even more vicious than you were?
Yeah.
See how you like it.
So here's my sad take on the Israelites, though.
Yes.
Because, they had been nervous about the Amalekites following them. However, when they refused to go into the Promised Land, because the Amalekites had arrived there first, obviously, they had already moved up there, they remembered Rephidim, and they became very afraid, because, remember, Rephidim, they fight the Amalekites, and they almost lose. It's the time when and Aaron hold up Moshe's hands, and they do fight a battle, but they lost a lot of casualties. That was a real battle. And so they remembered that, and when they came up to Israel in order to take it, they were scared. They were afraid. Now, they've seen all these things. They always come out on top. I realize there's blood and guts on this picture as well, but they come up and here's the land. I promised you. Go take it.
Right.
And they don't. In fact, they get so nervous they even threaten Moshe to kill him.
Yeah, they did.
So
they said you would have been better off just staying in Egypt.
Better off as a slave. At least we got fed.
Yeah.
So Yahweh is at it. So far he's ready. So he withdraws from his people, and he says, okay, for 40 years, he just wipes out an entire generation of everybody over 25.
Yes.
Now, when they not only did it cause their lives, cause them a chance to live in the Promised Land, but it forced them to deal with the Amalekites for generation after generation, because Yahweh says, all right, you're going to deal with these people for generation after generation after generation. Think about this for just a minute. They're out there in the desert for 40 years, but the Amalekites are well rooted now into the Promised Land, and they're having you find they have a profound effect on the Palestinians. They have a profound the Philistines, right? They have a profound effect on the Moabites and all of them. They are dominating them and teaching them the same viciousness. They're already vicious, but they're teaching them even more vicious approach to rulership than they would have had they not been there. And plus, they've invaded them with thousands and thousands of people as well. Yes. So you've got 40 years they let them get entrenched, and now it's going to take 400 years before you can get rid of these people.
Plus, you can't even go through the southern entrance up into Israel because they blocked it.
Yeah.
Which I was specifically said. So the only way in now is through what is now Jordan, on the east.
East side.
Can't come up through the south anymore.
Yeah. I'm going to skip down a little bit to the eighth little point I had. If I want to ask you a question. If Moshe hadn't arrived in time, he hadn't shown up at the events in Egypt, what would have happened?
Oh, if Yahweh and Moshe did not go into Egypt and pull out his people, and if Pharaoh had not been so condescending and then so duplicitous after he said, okay, you can go and then try to chase the Israelites across the Sea of Aqaba to die in that whirlpool. If Pharaoh had not lost his army and had not destroyed his country by being so hostile to Yahweh, would the Amalekites have been able to come in and plague Egypt? No, the answer is no. No, because even though the Amalekites were ruthless and they were numerous.
Obviously they did, because they went over to the whirlwind. Went over and followed them.
Yeah, but so the only reason the Amalekites could do so is because Egypt inflicted these wounds upon itself.
Yeah.
It's kind of like most nations. They aren't conquered from the outside because they have been healthy and done the right things. It's that they weaken themselves to make themselves so vulnerable it becomes inevitable. In other words, they die from within before they are conquered from the outside. And this was the case with Mitzrayim. They destroyed themselves. They were the victim of a self-imposed wound. And so the Amalekite had no resistance when coming in.
Yeah. Now, even though it was destroyed by all these cataclysmic events, you still have an army there. you still have a Pharaoh there, and you still have all the slaves. The slaves weren't going anywhere if Moshe don't show up.
That's correct.
So I mean, they ain't stupid. They know how it's going.
No, but the slaves were not going to.
This is not.
They weren't going to. Yeah, they were not going to fight on behalf of Mitzrayim, and they were not going to fight on behalf of the Amalekite.
No.
And the Amalekite would have continued to use them as slaves.
Yeah.
But the Amalekite, I don't think, had the sophistication. They were religious, they were political, they were militant, they were mean, they were corrupt, they were perverse.
They weren't the military.
But they were not the military that Pharaoh had.
Was in charge.
Yeah, there's a reason. Yeah, at that time there were two superpowers. One was Egypt, the other one was Babylon, Assyria.
Mm-hmm.
And the Hittites existed somewhere in between, a little bit further north, but somewhere in between. But the Amalekites were not a superpower. They just, but they were like barbarians that for a period of time, it's like the Mongols. The Mongols were really not a superpower, but they were able to invade and tax and control large swaths of land because they were just so vicious and in a vacuum of power. It's not like, for example, the first Muslims that followed Muhammad in the Islamic Golden Era were any more sophisticated than anybody else. They weren't. It's just that the Persians and the Romans and the Greeks had beat themselves into oblivion. That Rome was decaying, so that all that was really left was Byzantium, and it was being pummeled. Yeah, being pummeled by all the people that it had abused throughout Europe, and so they arose in a vacuum where the prevailing civilizations at the time had all destroyed themselves. The same thing was true with Egypt and the Amalekites. So if your question is, what would have happened if Moshe hadn't gone and the children of Israel hadn't been removed? None of this would have happened.
And so then the question becomes, is there evidence that these things actually did happen? And we've already cited some of them, and then it gets even, here's some more. Now, I'm not sure about our time, but that's where we started about page 11 on part 2. And all we had from Apura, and we cited that earlier in a show, that Pharaoh never returned.
Right.
He said the earth was darkened. Oh, I'm sorry. But there's another source from Josephus once again in Jewish Antiquities, quoting Manetho, once again the Greek historian. Says the earth was darkened, and His Majesty of Show went to battle against the companions of Apophi. Now, anytime there's somebody who's a fierce god of darkness, Apophi is a fierce god of darkness. That's what they're referring to.
You've heard of the asteroid named Apophis?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. God representing the pagan gods of darkness.
And then according to Manetho.
Oh, by the way, what happens when an asteroid of that size hits the Earth?
It wipes out most of the Earth.
Well, the Earth is plunged into a time of darkness because the debris that goes up into the atmosphere is such that there's no sunlight. All plant life dies almost instantly, and then shortly thereafter, all animal life. Yes, so that's why it's called the Apophi.
I'm sure that's why the Amalekites call themselves Apophi, the first one.
Gods of darkness. So,
It's supposed to frighten you.
Yes.
And then it goes on to say, and the king and his host never returned. And then you also have, from Griffin's The Antiquities, now when His Majesty of Ra, Amarshi, or Arakati, fought with the evildoers in the pool, the place of the whirlpool, the evildoers prevailed, not over His Majesty, of course, but His Majesty leapt into the so-called place of the whirlpool.
So in other words, rather than the Pharaoh couldn't, of course, be killed by Yahowah and the Israelites. No, that His Majesty, the Pharaoh, jumped into the whirlpool, which was what happened is when the two sides of the Sea of Aqaba joined up again. It created a whirlpool and sucked him down. He did it because he was going to go to the place of the darkness and reunite with the Egyptians, god of the dead and the darkness, which is where Pharaoh is always said to go.